All right, hello wine drinking people. It has been a long year so far. 2011, man, has started out at a breakneck pace. And we got a lot of great events coming up in the month of February. And man, you can see how much drinking I'm doing by this part of the show. It's called What I Drank Yesterday. And actually, we're a few days behind, so we've kind of combined a few days this week. And we had Paul Hobbs in at Market 17 last night. What a great event. And hey, we had Paul Hobbs people in before that in the week to show me some stuff because, you know, if I'm having dinner at night, usually I'm not taking notes, man. I'm just dining and drinking, having a good time. Even though I've got a pretty good memory, it's always better to get me right in my chair when I'm typing away, looking at the computer, tasting the wine, and really focusing on each and every wine. And it was nice to be able to sit down and taste through a selection of Paul's wines. You know, I think I mentioned this in the email to promote the event, that we were the first people to bring Paul's wines into South Florida. I remember when the former owner of the store, Jim Turner, called me up at Cafe Max. Andrew, you got to find this Paul Hobbs wine. And at that time, he was lighting up the charts in Connoisseur's Guide, which is a publication that just rates California wine. They rate it in smoke puffs. And, well, they call them stars, but they look like puffs. So 2 puffs and 3 puffs. Really good stuff usually, and he was getting a lot of 3 puffers at that time. So I looked up his phone number, Healdsburg information, boom, dialed it. There he was. He picked up the phone. This is Paul Hobbs, and I proceeded to tell him, you know, that we were the greatest restaurant in South Florida and faxing my wine list to impress him, and then he started selling us wine. So, you know, we were on the bandwagon from the very beginning. It's nice to hang out with Paul and break bread and catch up and see how he's doing. He's become one of the greatest successes in terms of consultants in California and his own label, which he started in 1991, and he's also known as one of the top consultants in Argentina. But today we just got some of his wines from Napa. He specializes in single vineyard wines. He's been working with some of the top growers in Napa and Sonoma ever since, since before he started his own label. He worked at Robert Mondavi Winery. He's consulted for several of the top labels in Napa, Lewis Cellars, Vine Cliff Winery, and Fisher Vineyards. So if you don't recognize his label, I'm sure you'll recognize somebody that he consulted for along the way. Well, let's start out with his Chardonnay Russian River. And all of his entry-level wines, like his Russian River Chardonnay and his Napa, are a blend of his single vineyard wines. This wine has got a great amount of ripe tree fruit here, apples and pears, notes of creme caramel, vanilla spice, a blend of, as I mentioned before, all those single vineyards that he does, and that lovely creamy texture on the tongue. One of the things you get from Paul's wines is this lovely texture in your mouth, and that's one of the things that makes wine so enjoyable. And they still have great balance, even though you do get a nice hand of toasty oak spice at the end, some lovely freshness to match excellent Chardonnay and typical California Russian River juice. All right, next up was the Ulysses Valdez Vineyard, and this is a migrant worker from Mexico who gained political asylum during the Reagan era, and he's one of the best-known farmers. He's got a great vineyard, which Paul's been using for years, and several other people use his fruit and just signify UV on the label for his name. But this wine had got some incredible minerality on the nose. This one you may have mistaken for Premier Cru or Grand Cru Burgundy. Some lovely, pretty floral notes as well, and incredible concentration of fruit on the palate. This is a wine that just lingers and lingers. Really nice long finish. I would say you want to keep this wine 7, 8, 10 years or more in your cellar. Most excellent. One of the best Chardonnays that I've had from California this year. All right, next up, one of my favorite wines of all time from Paul, his Hyde Vineyard Pinot Noir. Wow, what an amazing array of exotic spices, a ton of perfumed floral notes, black cherry liqueur-like fruits, really intense bouquet, thick and juicy on the tongue with layers of sweet, seductive black cherry liqueur-like fruit, a host of spices, and again, just lovely freshness coming through at the end. Most excellent. The Lindsay Pinot Noir, also outstanding, and lovely perfume on both of these wines. This wine may have had a little more minerality to it, a little clay-like minerality there. Some pretty black raspberry fruit, lovely velvety texture on the tongue here with, again, I mean, just a host of exotic spices, but great freshness on the finish. Maybe just a touch more complex than the Hyde, but both most excellent Pinot Noirs. All right, then up the Napa Cabernet, which this wine, on the nose, you really got some old world flavors, cigar, cedar, and then, some black cherry and currant berry fruit also, a little tobacco spice, kind of a mix of old world and new world. But as soon as you put the wine in your mouth, man, just this voluptuous fruit takes over, and it really screams Napa Valley, California Cabernet to me. And still fresh, but like I said, once I put this wine in my mouth, there's no mistaking it is typical Napa Valley Cabernet from a great vintage, 2007, almost a perfect growing season. All right, next up, Stagecoach Vineyard Cabernet, and Stagecoach is a very famous vineyard founded by Jan Krupp and his group of investors. We had Jan in last year. We know his wines, Varasian, very well, and Paul feels like he gets one of the best blocks of Stagecoach, and a very high elevation vineyard, and some incredibly good Cabernet, Syrah, and other Bordeaux varietals come from this. And you notice the mountain in this wine. You get a ton of minerality on the nose, a lot of dark spices, cherry and cassis berry fruit, a little bit of espresso and dark cocoa spices on this. Wow, and what a blockbuster on the palate. This is a wine that I put aside the glass for 6 hours just to see how it was going to open up, and it really does need some time. You can tell all the pieces are in place, but just an incredibly intense wine right now at the moment. Killer. I'd love to have it 10 to 20 years in my cellar. All right, well, that's all we had to drink from Paul Hobbs. And next up, we had a winery from Washington State, which Washington State, if I was going to start a winery, if I was going to go plan to buy vineyards, one of the few places that I could afford to buy vineyards with my measly salary that I make here at the Wine Watch, would be Washington State. In this country, you can still get prime vineyard lands for about $25,000 an acre. A little bit different from Napa. I think you're still over $100,000 in Napa, and some people pay upwards of $1 million an acre in Napa Valley for prime vineyards. So Washington State definitely has some potential here. The Milbrant family, they're farmers, and they keep a little bit of their fruit, and they sell a lot of it to big companies like Chateau Ste. Michelle. Hey, Charles Smith is a big buyer here. We're a big Charles Smith fan. Some great stuff from Washington State. These wines are really great little values, man. When you look at what you can get for 10 to 15 bucks from Washington State, one of the best value areas in this country, and one of the best case scenarios, grower producers. Well, Riesling, one of the things that they're becoming known for in Washington State, well, the Columbia Valley is a big area. This is an area in the northern part of the Columbia Valley. Evergreen Vineyard is what it's called, but some lovely white peach and lemon lime citrus fruit here on the nose, a hint of that flinty minerality that you get from Riesling, and a little bit of quinine note in there also. But 80% of the fruit from this vineyard actually goes to the Chateau Ste. Michelle and Dr. Lucen joint venture, Eroica, which we have in the store. Great little product. And also, Charles Smith buys fruit for this for his Kung Fu Girl wine. And both of these wines, a little bit more expensive than what these guys are charging. $11.50, a really nice little value if you like Riesling. Just a hint of sweetness, but enough acidity to match. All right, next up, the Chardonnay Tradition, and maybe one of the more boring wines, but it's hard for me to get excited about cheap Chardonnay. I mean, the wine was politically correct. It was nice, just a hint of oak, maybe 10%, but, typical inexpensive Chardonnay from a cooler climate. All right, next up, the Chardonnay The Estates. And this wine had a little bit more to it, a little bit more oak spice, some anise, vanilla, and some lovely lemon and pear fruits. And, like I said, a bit more on the finish, but still, for $16.50, a little bit more exciting. And, just Chardonnay, like I said, inexpensive Chardonnay. It's hard to get me excited about it. And they do make some good Chardonnay in Washington State, though. Woodward Canyon, check that stuff out. Outstanding, the 07 and 08 vintage. All right, Milbrant Vineyards Merlot Traditions. And, the wine maker here was actually from North Star Winery. So one of our favorite producers in Washington State. So the Merlots were really the stars of the lineup here. This little Merlot for short money, even though, it wasn't a great Merlot, really nice textbook inexpensive Merlot with some lovely fresh plum and cherry fruit, a nice hand of fresh herbs in there, one of the characteristics of Merlot, and a nice savory finish. Really zesty, not a heavy, fruity Merlot, a sweet Merlot rather, like you get cheap Merlot from California. Really nice and varietally correct. All right, and then we have the Cabernet Sauvignon Traditions, and I think you've heard me mention Traditions, and then they have another line. The Traditions is their inexpensive wine called The Estates, which is kind of their next level up. But this Cabernet, another really good value. Again, for $13.50, man, it's hard to find stuff this good from California. Black currants, black cherry fruit, some fresh plowed earth, fresh herbs, dark cocoa nuance. Really forward and approachable style of Cabernet Sauvignon. The Cabernet Merlot sometimes in Washington State will fool you. You think Cabernet could be Merlot, and Merlot is Cabernet Sauvignon. But a really nice little wine, even though it is a little bit light for Cabernet Sauvignon. Next up, the Merlot Estates. This wine was excellent. As I mentioned before, man, Merlot, some of the best Merlot in the New World coming out of Washington State, or of this country, coming out of Washington State, and some of the oldest soils in the Columbia Valley, the Huiliki Slope appellation, a new appellation I think was established in 2006, but lovely complexity here, Pomerol-like on the nose, dried herbs, plummy, curranty fruits, some nice mocha and spice there, and a nice amount of, nice solid core of fruit on the palate. Merlot tends to be a little more in the front of your mouth than Cabernet, which tends to end up in the back, but still had some nice length on the finish. Really nice little Merlot. All right, folks. Well, that's what I had to drink yesterday. I'm your host, Andrew Lamposone, signing off for the Wine Watch, saying remember, always drink the good stuff first.